Director of the Graduate Studies in Music Education. She teaches rhythmics, solfege, improvisation, plastic anime pedagogy, and qualitative methodology in music education research. She's also the Director of Studies of the Dalcroze Society in Canada and Vice President of the College of the Institute Jacques Dalcroze, Geneva. In addition, she serves on the editorial board of the Journal Recherche en Éducation Musicale. Her own research interests include the relation between music and body movement, the process of improvisation, and qualitative research methodologies in music learning and teaching. A frequently lecturer and workshop leader in Canada, Europe, Asia, and the USA, Dr. Mathieu also supervises music education research projects. The floor is yours.
First, I would like to say that I'm very pleased to be here today, and I want particularly to thank John for organizing this wonderful event and inviting me to participate in it. Yes. Jacques Dalcroze was a man of many talents. A concert pianist, composer, conductor, and theater director, his ideas have influenced on many of the arts. When in 1892 he was appointed professor at the Geneva Conservatory of Music, he found the curricula and teaching methods fragmented and theoretical, too disconnected from the students' emotions and sensations. From then on, Dalcroze set about devising a new approach to music education that addressed the person as a whole. Thus was born Dalcroze Eurythmics, an approach that recognized the fundamental role of the body and of body movement in music perception and performance. What has become of Dalcroze's ideas today? How do researchers treat the contribution of body movement to music education now? Before addressing these questions in more detail, let us step back to the end of the 18th century and the influence of Rousseau, whose ideas regarding the education of children were to prove highly influential. Rousseau thought that all educational methods should be based on observing the child with the aim of fostering the natural and complete development of the human being. This way of thinking was taken up a century later by many authors such as Pestalozzi, Colben, Claparède, Dewey, De Crowley, Montessori, Freinet, and later by Neil and Piaget. Although different in attitude and approach, all these writers set themselves against traditional schooling, advocating the need for a scientific approach and a focus on the child with his own distinctive characteristics. Gautier calls this period, quote, a high point, maybe even unequal in the history of pedagogy in the broadest sense, and of the new pedagogy in particular, unquote. He maintains that this vision of teaching still forms the basis for current pedagogical practices. It is during this period of ferment, even of revolution with regard to the very concept of education, that Dalcroze developed eurythmics. There is clear evidence that he was influenced by the ideologies of his period and adhered to the new trends in teaching. In a letter of June 1st, 1916, addressed to rhythmicians, he openly challenged traditional schooling. Quote, the sole aim of study seems to be to inform pupils of generalities relating to a number of subjects that they have no opportunity to check for themselves. There is an abyss between early childhood education marked by the logic of the natural procedures advocated by Froebel and Pestalozzi, and the centuries-old routine instruction to which adolescents are submitted. No sooner does the child enter secondary school than it seems that the purpose of the program of study is to try to make him forget that he exists, unquote. This new vision of education set in motion a paradigm shift that, through Pestalozzi, had wide-ranging repercussions. As a result, we notice that music education in 19th century adopted new principles derived explicitly from Pestalozzi. Let me mention three of them. To teach sounds before signs, and the child how to sing before he learns the names of the notes and the written notation. To teach him principles and theory after practical experience. To lead him to perceive similarities and differences between sounds through listening and imitation instead of explanation. In a word, to offer him active rather than passive learning. It is worth recalling here that Dalcroze was much influenced by his mother, who taught the philosophical and pedagogical principles of Pestalozzi. For Dalcroze, the principal aim of education is to help the child to know himself and to develop his personality. In his view, the arts, and music in particular, had the power to arouse a person's vital forces, so enabling him to act and think for himself. Dalcroze identifies many ways in which musical development fosters personal development. For example, let us remember the link he made between the importance to the musician of the capacity of inner hearing and to the individual for listening to himself. Quote, if we knew how to step back to sing and hear our own melody in the midst of those of others, if we were able to preserve our own personality at the very moment when we are in full contact with society, what joy would we experience in being part of it, unquote. It is interesting to note here that for Dalcroze, the individual does not develop in a vacuum. On the contrary, it is in contact with others that he strengthens his own person and, in so doing, contributes not only to his personal development, but that of society as a whole. We can draw a parallel between the views of Dalcroze and those of Piaget, considered the father of constructivism. For Piaget, personality is formed in the correlation of autonomy and reciprocity. Speaking of personhood, he states that the person is one who sees himself in perspective in relation to others and who, with self-discipline, places himself in a reciprocal relationship with them. In considering educational methods, Piaget favors active education over traditional schooling. In his view, a decision to gain control of the self will result in greater self-possession and in the acquisition of an enduring method that fosters a lifetime of inexhaustible curiosity. In the same way, Dalcroze emphasizes the importance of taking personal responsibility for one's own development. He writes, quote, it is for you to discover for yourself how to make these exercises, talking about the method, the exercises of the method, how to make these exercises your own, how to use them according to your own temperament. In this way, the worker forges the tools he needs for his profession and uses them according to the conformation of his own hand and arm, with the intensity of his breath and the aptitudes of his entire organism, unquote. Do these ideals of earlier times still inspire today's educators? Certainly, there are many who think that the teacher's role is to guide pupils successfully and prepare them to find their place in the world. Pedagogical discussion continues to rely on science, drawing on the data from psychology, neurophysiology, and related disciplines. Following the pioneers of the new pedagogy, those who conceive educational projects today place the pupil at the center of the learning process and aim at the development of the whole person. Educational policies dedicated to curriculum development and programs of study recognize the contribution of the arts to the emotional, physical, intellectual, and social development of the pupil, and recommend that place be made for them in the curriculum. Dalcroze is certainly recognized as one of the great teachers of the 20th century, and it is interesting to know that his ideas, underlining the inseparable bonds between the sensory, emotional, and cognitive dimensions of humankind, are validated by much scientific research. Evidence of their foundational presence in contemporary pedagogy can be found in the large number of books, teaching manuals, and guides that praise the merits of the Dalcroze approach in music education. Let us look in more detail at the links established by contemporary researchers between the Dalcroze approach and some of today's valued educational theories. Bryce considers the Dalcroze approach in relation to Gardner's multiple theory, intelligences. She claims that both Dalcroze and Gardner oppose a one-dimensional conception of intelligence, since they criticize schools for awarding primacy to logical mathematical reasoning. According to Bryce, both pedagogues acknowledge the learner's multidimensional potential. Following a descriptive analysis of eurythmics lesson given to children, Bryce draws from Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences to identify the many forms of intelligence that are called into play when learning eurythmics. Sorry, I think I clicked twice. So that was Bryce and the multiple intelligence theory related to Gardner's. Juntunen and Westerlund highlight the link between the theories of Dalcroze, Dewey, Eliot, and Rygelski. In particular, they emphasize that education for Dalcroze must be grounded in action and personal experience. This, they argue, relates the Dalcroze approach to Dewey's pragmaticism and Eliot's praxialism. Because Dalcroze believed musical understanding was rooted in the body's actions and anchored in sensory experience, they link his view to the learning process of Dewey's learning by doing, and Eliot and Rygelski thinking in action and knowing in action. They also observed that Dalcroze and Dewey both emphasized the importance of not divorcing theory from practice, and that before learning rules and concepts, learners should have first-hand experience of the facts on which these rules and concepts are based. Campbell notices that Dewey's new pedagogy and Dalcroze education principles led to the development of child-centered pedagogical practices and to the elaboration of music curricula that aim at fostering the overall abilities of children, including their creative and expressive skills. Likewise, Alperson, in a study whose goal was to identify eurythmics' essential characteristics in adults' learning, shows that eurythmics is student-centered and aimed at developing the learner's autonomy. These researchers bring to the fore the affinity of the Dalcroze approach with constructivism, identified by Webster in the Menck Handbook Research on Music Learning, published in 2011, as an important force in today's educational landscape, as one of the big ideas in education. Alperson also maintains that the non-competitive environment experienced by adults in eurythmics classes promotes cooperation, and this association is supported in a recent study by Vaillancourt, when she observed that the rhythmic teacher, quote, constructs bridges between the inner experience of the pupil and the external world while encouraging mutual cooperation between persons, unquote. Vaillancourt situates this way of doing things within Vygotsky's socioconstructive theory when it underlines the body's social nature, the doubly social nature of thought. Citing Legendre, she writes, quote, "It is not only that this thought is formed by means of semiotic tools originating in social and cultural history, music, the tools for Dalcroze's music, but that such tools are internalized through the carrying out of interactive activities with others and so modify the organization and function of thought." She recalls also that Vygotsky strongly criticized direct and purely verbal scholastic teaching methods, rather preferring more indirect, subtle, and complex methods that favor the development of the child's ability to form concepts. Vygotsky recommends a constructive dialectical interaction between the child's spontaneous representations and socially constructed concepts. There is a striking similarity between the principles advocated by Vygotsky and Alperson's observation of a progressive distancing that takes place in the interaction between the student and teacher in a rhythmics class. She attributes this to communication gradually taking place only through music, a phenomenon she identifies as indirect teaching and nonverbal learning. She notices furthermore that two learning modalities appear to be at work, the intellectual and the sensory, and that a unique cyclical process spontaneously occurs from idea into action into idea. This brief appraisal of the work of Bryce, Juntunen, and Westermann, Campbell, Alperson, and Vaillancourt confirms the pervasive presence of Dalcroze's way of thinking in today's learning theories. Let us now turn to one of the emblematic aspects of the Dalcroze approach, the part played by body movement in the learning of music. According to Dalcroze, musical consciousness is the result of physical experience. The intensity of musical feelings depends on the intensity of our physical sensations. Intrinsic links between music and movement have been explained by researchers interested in studying their relationship from the point of view of the auditory motor nature of musical perception. In 1966, Teplov asserted that the fundamental nature of the perception of rhythm is motor. In his view, the perception of music is accompanied absolutely and immediately by motor reactions reproducing the various degrees, the temporal course of the musical movement. The perception of music has an active auditory motor nature. A review of about 175 neurocognitive studies conducted in 2007 by Zatori, Cheng, and Penpoon present an overview of the current understanding of motor control and perception of sound. These studies examine brain activity and the functional architecture of the brain, as well as the complexity of the neural network. They discovered, among other things, that the signals emitted from the premotor cortex provokes responses in the auditory cortex, even in the absence of sound. Conversely, when a sound is heard, motor representations are active even in the absence of movement. These authors suggest that the neural substrate of these cognitive representations is the circuitry linking auditory and motor system. There has been an explosion in neuroscientific studies in recent years. An entire chapter of the Oxford Handbook of Music Education, published in 2012, is devoted to the implications of neurosciences and brain research for music teaching and learning. The authors, Donald Hodges and Wilfried Grün, mentioned that there are two extremely important aspects for education that come from brain research: the involvement of the body and movement in the learning process, and the role of emotion and motivation. They note that if learning is seen as the development of mental representations, it is crucial to understand that the only way to build representations in the cortex is through body movement, and conclude that to build a mental representation of the musical phenomenon, it is fairly inefficient to present a verbal explanation instead of initiating a corporeal experience that then be associated with a term or symbol. Drawing from the brain-specific self-rewarding system naturally produced in the body, they also connect effective learning with emotionally arousing positive experiences. This suggestion brings us to the approach adopted by Dalcroze, who writes that during a rhythmics class, thanks to an instinctive transformation of the movements of sounds into body movement, the student develops a fast and light system of communication between all the agents of movement and of thinking. Dalcroze also notes that these exercises belonging to his method contribute to the establishment of a closer collaboration between conscious desires and instinctive possibilities of realization, and that in so doing they give rise to a joy, an inner satisfaction that suffuses the entire organism. Contemporary neuroscientific data provide anchorage for a number of theoretical and philosophical studies defending the essential and fundamental role of the body in human experience, including cognition. That said, we should remember that many philosophers have thought about human nature from the point of view of the mind-body relationship, and their thought has marked the course of history and influenced our conception of the world. From Plato to Descartes, Dewey and Merleau-Ponty, to name just a few, the discourse on mind and body has evolved a great deal. Once studied separately as two distinct entities, the mind and the body are now considered indissociable from one another, forming a single entity. These divergent notions have been the basis for various educational and aesthetics theories. Bowman, a contemporary philosopher of music education, considers in particular that the mind and body dichotomy, specifically the predominant value placed on the mind throughout the course of history, has greatly influenced the theorians of musical aesthetics. According to him, their writings are marked by ambivalence towards, even mistrust of, the body. He detects in their arguments about music and the aesthetic experience a kind of centrifugal force that distances the body, however central it is to musical experience, putting trust instead in the abstract cognitive experience. Bauman considers that this attitude has penetrated the classroom to such an extent that music is valued not for itself, but only for its cognitive benefits. Bauman emphasizes that musical experience is always embodied. When we hear a musical performance, we do not just think, nor do we just hear. We participate with our whole bodies. We construct and enact it. We feel melodies in our muscles as much as we process them in our brains, or perhaps more accurately, our brains process them as melodies only to the extent our bodily extended schemata render that possible. Bauman follows in the steps of the neurologist Mathieu, whose ideas have three main premises. The human brain and the rest of the body constitute an indissociable organism. integrated by means of mutually interactive biochemical and neural regulatory circuits. The organism interacts with the environment as an ensemble. The interaction is neither of the body alone nor the brain alone. The physiological operations that we call mind are derived from the structural and functional ensemble rather than from the brain alone. Mental phenomena can be fully understood only in the context of an organism interacting in an environment. Moreover, Mathieu considers that consciousness is grounded in three distinct but interdependent phenomena: an emotion, the feeling of that emotion, and knowing that we have a feeling of that emotion. He underlines that because of their inextricable ties to the body, the feelings come first in development and retain a primacy that subtly pervades mental life. Feelings have a say on how the rest of the brain and cognition go about their business. It is timely here to recall that at the very beginning of the 20th century, the education recommended by Dalcroze was already based on the close relationships between the movements of the body and those of the soul, on sensations and on emotions. In 1924, he states, "I know and I think because I feel and I experience." With regard to the mind-body relationship and the Dalcroze approach, Sheech Johnston remarks are most enlightening. She writes, I quote, "When we strip the lexical band-aid embodiment off the more than 350-year-old wound inflicted by the Cartesian split of mind and body, we find animation, the foundational dimension of living. Everything living is animated. For Sheech Johnston, the phenomenon of movement testifies to animation as the foundational dimension of the living." In her book, The Primacy of Movement, she demonstrates brilliantly that movement is the originating ground of knowledge. Her thorough description of kinesthesia, what Dalcroze called the muscular sense, and her sound account of the spatio-temporal energic concepts as first and foremost corporeal concepts, which come from experiences of movement, anchored Dalcroze's ideas regarding the role of body movement in music perception and music sense-making. Dalcroze writes, "Life itself is nothing but a series of rhythmical sequences, acts, and thoughts. A rhythm is always the result of an impulse originated in the nervous system, in the sympathetic nerve, in the mind of the affective state of a human being, anima. For Dalcroze, time, space, and energy are intrinsic qualities of both music and movement. He considers that the movement of the music derives from bodily feeling, and that because of this, student can pick up the bodily feeling that is intrinsically in the music, identify it, identify with it, and express it. Ida, describing listening, sheds light on the common characteristic of music and movement. He notes, sounds move in the rhythm of auditory presence. The intimate relationship between animation, motion, and sound lies at the treasure of the inner secret of auditory experience, the timefulness of sound. The auditory field is not a static field." Before concluding this section of my paper, I would like to acknowledge the work of contemporary researchers who have identified links between the empirical discoveries of Dalcroze and theoretical studies on embodiment. In 2005, Zeitz surveys literature on the physiological and neurological basis of musical expression. She realizes that in music, all its major elements, melody, melodic contour, rhythm, phrasing, cadence points, accents, micro-variation in timing and dynamics, and harmony, among others, are informed by and draw on bodily processes. Zeitz argues that Dalcroze's original idea of placing the body and movement at the core of music education is still today fundamental to musicians, music educators, and psychologists. In 2004, Juntunen and Livönen studied the reciprocity between Dalcroze eurythmics and the phenomenology of Merleau-Ponty in relation to the central role played by the body in the perception and understanding of the world. Like Dalcroze, Merleau-Ponty considers the body to be the key attribute of knowledge. For him, humans come to know the world by being in the world through the body. As a result of this, Juntunen and Livönen consider it is possible to analyze eurythmics under the framework of Merleau-Ponty's philosophy. Indeed, precisely because eurythmics constitutes a bodily way of being in sound, musical knowledge is incarnate. It grows from the individual's personal experience. Following Orista, Juntunen and Livönen observed that the embodiment of music as it occurs in eurythmics can be viewed as a physical metaphor for musical understanding. This notion is taken from Lakoff and Johnson, who consider metaphor to be a vehicle of knowledge. Dalcroze himself spoke in a metaphorical way when he invited learners to let their bodies become music. In that respect, Young's reflection on eurythmics and the role of body movement in music education could be seen as an interpretation of the Dalcrozian metaphor. When Young describes the Dalcroze approach, she examines how actual and imaginary body movement gives form to the elusive and ephemeral nature of music, and how it reveals its structure and expressive qualities. Furthermore, Juntunen and Livönen discuss how a physical metaphor provides a link between the concrete and the abstract, and thus constitutes a pre-reflective form of knowing. They argue that the importance of such a non-linguistic form of cognition should not be diminished or rejected on the grounds that it is bodily constructed or constituted. On the contrary, they stress that it is of cardinal importance because the body forms the basis of all knowing, including conceptual knowing. In building bridges between the Dalcroze approach and well-known scholars such as Dewey, Merleau-Ponty, Lakoff, Johnson, Sheet-Johnson, the theoretical studies of Zeitz, Orista, Jung, Juntunen, and Livönen bring invaluable insight to our understanding of Dalcroze eurythmics and its value as a teaching practice nowadays. Another group of studies measure the impact of eurythmics on rhythmic perception, melodic musical growth, beat competency, performance skill, rhythmic attitudes, and achievement. In all these studies, using an experimental research design, that is pre-test and post-test on control and experimental groups, children who took eurythmics lessons when compared with those who did not showed significantly higher results. It is interesting to know that all these experimental studies date from the 80s and the 90s and involve preschool and primary school children. As far as we are aware, no research has been done on measuring the influence of rhythmics on the musical and instrumental development of adolescents and adults. Carlos Abril observed in the Menck Handbook of Research on Music Learning, published in 2012, that the pedagogical literature on movement in music education is primarily geared toward working with students at the primary and elementary school. And while there is some discussion about using movement in instrumental music and or at the secondary level, it is limited in scope and far less prominent. It is also interesting to observe that no studies have attempted to measure the effect of rhythmics on creativity, despite the importance accorded to this in music teaching and learning today. This kind of research would be particularly interesting because, in Dalcroze's view, his method favored the development of creativity and imagination. While descriptive and explicative studies confirm the positive impact of eurythmics on the development of musical abilities in children, most exploratory studies focus on adult learners' perception of their experience. For instance, in 2012, Hebron designed a pilot study using interviews to investigate the experiences of 12 student composers during a 13-week course of Dalcroze eurythmics. Results show that all participants enjoyed their experience, and half of them considered that eurythmics had a direct influence on their compositional work. They reported various beneficial impacts: improved oral experience, improved oral awareness and musical knowledge, an acceleration of the learning processes, increased body awareness and self-confidence, and the positive influence of group experiences. These results are corroborated by findings of a research project of my own devising. 5 years ago, during a project involving the realization in movement and space of musical repertoire, I became interested in the experience of 4 students from the University Music Department. The realization in movement in space of musical repertoire, called Plastique Animé by Dalcroze, lead to the exploration of the close connections that exist between music and body movement, in particular the rapport between the intensity of sound and muscular energy, between silence and stillness, thematic development and gestural transformation, musical form and the structuring of movement in space, between orchestration and various ways of combining and placing body shapes. This interpretation in movement of the essence of the music and its expressive qualities requires a process which simultaneously reveals musical interpretation and choreography. In transforming the music of sound into the music of gesture, the musician dancer himself becomes music. Embodying the music in this way requires a deep knowledge and understanding of the musical composition that corresponds to the kind of understanding required for musical interpretation and performance. At the same time, the musical work, in becoming visible thanks to body movement, is itself transformed in a new work, the fruit of kinesthetic, sonorous, and visual sensations. The diverse activities undertaken during the project are based on Dalcroze procedures. By way of an epilogue to the project, the students were asked to respond to the following questions. Has your participation in this project influenced your musical development, your artistic development, your personal development? On the musical level, responses reported by the students were as follows. Moving spontaneously and responding physically while listening to music helped to develop our ability to listen and our oral acuity. The transposition into body movement of various melodic and rhythmic motifs, musical phrases, melodic contour, and harmonic progression of a piece of music improved our understanding of musical structure and the feelings aroused by it. Improvising in movement helped us to grasp the energy of the sound, musical momentum, and impulses of the piece in relation to its orchestration, instrumentation, and structural and harmonic development. Embodying the music in this way contributed to the development of our musicianship. On the artistic level, the main points reported were improvisation of all kinds, vocal, instrumental, in movement with materials, small, big balls, elastics, alone, in pairs, trios, quartets, was essential to the work of creation and of interpretation. Improvisation not only contributed to the process of exploring and structuring the choreography, but developed qualities essential to interpretation. In particular, the ability to attend to the present moment, body and soul, to respond spontaneously, to open oneself to the impulses of the music, to give free rein to the expression of feelings and emotion, to be at the service of music while remaining creative. Since the public performance of these works provided an opportunity for exchange with many different kinds and levels of artists, it enabled us to look critically at our own artistic development. On the personal level, the students affirmed that the body, the locus of experimentation, expression, and acquisition of knowledge, and the work of the group together became vectors of self-knowledge. Here are the words they use in speaking of the effect of the project on their personal development. This project helped me to learn to listen to my body, to trust my instinct, to enter into a state of spontaneity and receptivity, to be authentic by accepting my strength and my limitations, and in accepting the gaze of another person upon me, not to fear ridicule, to open myself to others, to know myself and to understand the importance of knowing oneself well as a person before being able to interact in serenity with others. All in all, and in the light of these students' testimonies, it is reasonable to conclude that the project succeeded in responding to a good number of educational objectives linked to their musical and artistic training, objectives that match the range of learning domains generally recognized by researchers interested in educational objectives. Let us recall that during the project, the students were invited to analyze their perceptions, resolve problems that arose, make decisions, assess their achievements, all abilities relating to cognition. On the psychomotor plane, they learned to develop the acuity of their perception, auditory, visual, kinesthetic. They also developed many sensory abilities. They noticed, moreover, that this experience brought with it self-knowledge, awareness of emotional feelings, openness towards others, sharing, exchange, and communication, all of which are affective and social elements of learning. On the cognitive plan, I witnessed for myself the motivation they displayed throughout the project and their commitment and engagement. The definition of the French term engagement states that it is the attitude of the artist who puts his thought or his art at the service of a cause. Researchers have also been interested in the effect of eurythmics on musical interpretation and performance. In 2005, two studies, one by Deslo Kirsten and the other by Mathieu, describe the experiences of performance during classes in dynamic rehearsal, an application of Dalcroze principles to the rehearsal and performance of musical repertoire developed during the 19th by Karen Greenhead. Greenhead uses various materials, typically a small trampoline, rhythmic gymnastic balls, and scarves, and techniques including silent rehearsal in movement. Here is how one of the performers describes her experience of dynamic rehearsal. I quote, "While you are rehearsing your piece in movement, it is impossible for any technical, instrumental issues to affect your interpretation of the music. When you return to the instrument, you strive for the sounds you heard inside your mind when moving." Unquote. Through the use of recordings, field notes, and participant diaries, Deslo and Mathieu describe and analyze the processes used by Greenhead in teaching soloists and ensembles. The principal benefits recorded were as follows: improvements in balance, center, and grounding, leading to release of unnecessary tension while performing. A better quality of sound, more resonance and depth. The consolidation of musical intention, clearer representation of the sound image. A deeper internalization of music and emotional responses. The development of kinesthetic sensations to refer to when playing. An improvement in ensemble skills such as breathing together, nonverbal communication, timing and building together towards a musical arrival point. A growing awareness of the big picture of the piece and its structure that enabled the group to create foreground and background nuances and to find ways of handling repetition. Another piece of research worth mentioning is Botel's own case study of a conductor's application of the Dalcroze approach to interpretative decision-making, Untitled The Embodied Score. Over the course of 6 filmed sessions, he used all 3 branches of the method, rhythmic, solfège, and improvisation, to make interpretative decisions about 2 contrasting pieces that he was preparing to conduct. After each session, he described the process of his interpretative decision-making. Botel concludes that his approach was successfully implemented. He writes, "I ended the case study with a clear sense of where each piece of music was going and in what fashion. Concurrently, I had developed a matching vocabulary of gesture. My exploration of the possible range and dimensions of each gesture meant that I felt quite prepared to begin rehearsals. I also found that my rate of memorization was significantly accelerated. I can say with some certainty that each choice was based on how it worked in my body, which is surely a crucial criteria for any conductor. My experiences show that working on the direct connection between gesture and music enables a very different way of thinking and may provide unexpected benefits." Dalcroze-based literature regarding the applications of eurythmics to conducting is not new. Daly's recent doctoral dissertation, Move to Learn, Dalcroze Applications to Choral Pedagogy and Practice, published in 2013, presents a complete review of literature on the subject. In order to situate the original writings of Jacques Dalcroze with current practice of his approach in the context of choir, Daly conducted semi-structured interviews with 8 choral conductors. She concludes that the Dalcroze approach provides a philosophical and pedagogical framework for choral pedagogy and practice for the following purposes: develop a range of choral skills, including vocal skills, oral, kinesthetic, ensemble, and music literacy skills. To prepare the whole body for accurate and expressive performance of choral repertoire. To develop non-musical outcomes that support choral conducting and singing, including mental acuity, creativity, a contextualized view of self and others, self-confidence, and risk-taking, and enjoyment in music making. Findings from these recent studies show that adults' experience of Dalcroze eurythmics is positive. A range of benefits to the musical, artistic, personal, and social aspects of one's life was reported regarding the practice of eurythmics, whether in the context of music composition or performance. In today's paper, I have summarized the major research projects conducted on Dalcroze eurythmics within the field of music education. Some scholars link eurythmics to educational theories at the core of contemporary pedagogy. Many studies indicate its positive impact on the development of musical, instrumental, and creative skills, as well as on the person's general faculties. Other studies call attention to the indissociability of the auditory and motor systems, and yet others, by highlighting the mind-body entity in relation to musical perception, comprehension, and execution, reveal the foundational relationship between music and movement, underscoring the educational value of Dalcroze eurythmics. Dalcroze's ideas have found application in many other domains. A documentary search that I conducted through various databases revealed that many Dalcroze studies stemming from a wide range of academic disciplines and research fields such as music history, music theory, theater, dance, cinema, somatic education, special education, therapy, and gerontology, written in a wide range of languages. The majority of these studies were conducted between 1985 and 2013. quite new. This abundance and variety suggests that in spite of being more than 100 years old, eurythmics remains a topic of interest amongst contemporary researchers. All in all, the scope of current research on eurythmics demonstrates the richness, educative value, and topicality of the Dalcroze approach. As Marie-Laure Bachmann comments in her seminal book, Dalcroze Today, An Education Through and Into Music, a particular method should not be granted pride of place or held superior to another just because it is older. What counts is that it remains a living force today and addresses itself to the future of the individual as much as to his present. Thank you.
So I have prepared a short response. First, I want to thank Ms. Mathieu for a beautiful keynote, for her thorough examination and comprehensive overview of the historical roots and main issues of, as well as the recent research on Dalcroze eurythmics. According to the studies she refers to concerning the impact of eurythmics on artistic and human development, the range of benefits is extensive. And in this light, it seems that Dalcroze eurythmics is doing well in this 21st century. However, there are also issues that require critical stance and attention. Currently, in many music education programs, Dalcroze teaching faces challenges. For example, the Dalcroze program, the Royal Academy of Music in Stockholm, is being closed. Music education methods in general are currently under critical scrutiny by scholars of music education, at least in Europe and North America. For instance, Kathy Benedict and Thomas Regelski have recently argued that with methods, there's a danger of ending up teaching the method instead of music, the tools becoming the curriculum by themselves. According to Regelski, the uncritical acceptance of a method ensures the blind faith that technical skill alone produces taken for granted ends. Applying a method abdicates personal and ethical responsibility for reflective professional practice, he argues. These critiques call attention and critical reflection also among the practitioners and researchers of the Dalcroze approach. For example, in Dalcroze training, learning to teach still rests, at least partly, on the practice of watching and observing experienced teachers in action, which does not necessarily lead to reflective teaching practices, but rather continues the apprenticeship of what already is, as argued by John Dewey, for example. Since model lessons cannot replace intellectual independence, it's important that teacher training encourages the teacher candidates to question, to test new ideas, to reflect beyond their own apprenticeship or beyond the commonly accepted. As Louise Mathieu noted, the pedagogical material of and discussion about using movement with adolescents is limited. Maybe this challenge could be taken seriously also in Dalcroze teacher training. Along this age group, special attention could be paid to boys and men. For example, as how to make Dalcroze rhythmics more appealing for them. This issue will hopefully be addressed also in research in this century. Reading of all the positive impacts and student experiences of Dalcroze eurythmics raises a question. Are we looking only for success stories, or are we welcoming also negative experiences, doubts, uncertainty, disagreement, and so on? And I will end up by referring to the question that Eric Barnhill raised yesterday. I personally hope that in this century the studies, Dalcroze studies, not only inform the practice of and make connections to research results of various fields, but also actively update and build further the theory and theoretical understanding of Dalcroze eurythmics. That is, fundamentals that include commonly recognized and accepted axiom ideals of the ethical and other guiding philosophical considerations. Respectively, Dalcroze practice can rely even more firmly upon underlying theory and the fund of widely accepted practice-based knowledge generated by theory that is required to deal with the extensive variety of predictably unique problems and needs presented by those served. Thank you, and now I want to open the floor for questions and comments.
Thank you, Helena, for this very insightful thinking. I think you raised, in fact, very, very important issues about the place of Dalcroze in music education. And I don't know if it's time for me just to comment on what you refer to as the method. I think there is a question of language terminology, because we also are talking about the Dalcroze approach. So when we talk about the method, what is a method exactly? What is an approach? And you have these terminological terms that have to be clarified. And maybe one thing that would be nice would be to reply to these scholars, Fergensky, and present our view of dealing with that. Because when we use the word method and we associate it with Dalcroze, we see it as something very systematically organized and prescribed in a way, which is not something that is prescribed. I think that Dalcroze gave us principles, and in fact he wrote many exercises, many lessons that he gave, but he didn't want the students to have his notes, because what he was looking for was for the students to understand the principles of the approach and to try to find his or her own way of applying that in the classroom. And I do appreciate the fact that you also mentioned that obviously in my paper I was pointing out the benefits that the different researchers report on the Dalcroze approach. But I did not see any study mentioning some negative aspects, but that doesn't mean that there are none, But obviously, I think it's nice to think of the positive effects and think that with that we can continue the work and find, in fact, to develop and improve it. And the other comment you made about referring to Eric Barnhill, I don't think I understood everything you said, but if I understood well, that the links that the Dalcroze researchers or practitioners could make with other disciplines to find foundation. Is that what you said? I'm not sure. I'm discussing that later. Maybe. Okay.
Can I just shortly say, I totally agree with you about the approach, but what is need to be done is to take part of this international conversation with the scholars of music education and explain not only here, but to have that conversation going on with them. And that's what
I agree with you 100%. The problem is that we are a small community. I think that's part of the problem. We are a very small community, very busy people. We are mainly practitioners and not researchers. Yeah. And so when we are doing research, it demands, it's like we have the passion for most of us is the music, is the practice, and we came, for most of us, we came into research after that. So it's like the balance between these two things, but I agree with you that it will be very important to share, to be present in this very important conference. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that discussion about developing research and engaging in other communities is something we might be able to continue in the plenary later.
I think that would be important.
I don't want to keep you from your lunch, but it would be a shame not to have questions from the floor. So could I just have a couple, please?
Thank you so much, Louise. This was absolutely spectacular. It was just marvelous. I'm just so enthused.
Yeah.
Yes, over here. Now here I am. I was wondering if you could share with us your bibliography, your references.
Yes, yes. I will. You send me an email and I will send it to you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
This is a very general comment, but before I go on, just thank you, Louise, for so many resources of information. Beautiful, beautiful job. As we're becoming more enlightened about what Dalcroze is about and learning more in scientific realms of what Dalcroze is about and why it works. In the public schools, we're having less space, fewer programs made on the side of the researcher. We know so much more, and we can justify so much more. We're not getting through in the schools. I mean, it's a very complicated issue when you bring up the practicality of taking time to do this, but I like the idea that we communicate with people in other communities and make inroads so that these theories and these principles and all of these connections we're making become known on a wider level, because it's not getting through in the schools, especially the public schools in the U.S.
I was just going to say something, sorry, thank you, Louise, it's wonderful, about this engaging with other people from the experience John and I had a couple of weeks ago where we presented at the conference for semantics and dance practice. And it was a paper, and I very much felt, in fact we talked about it a little bit afterwards, the difficulty when you are talking about something nobody has an experience of. See, we're talking about something which is by nature experiential. And it seems to me somehow you have to get the people in charge of funding and policy making into the class to understand anything about it. John, well, you were there, so you can say what you...
Well, I just want to make a little parenthesis because I realized I forgot at the beginning of my talk to thank Karen Greenhead for helping me with the translation of my paper. Thank you very much, Karen. Sorry.
One more.
This is another plug for Discover Dalcroze, because Discover Dalcroze is trying to do exactly what Karen is talking about, bringing the people that make the decisions into a weekend where they can have the experience and have a little bit of a few papers as well, but have the experience of the three different things. So please, please, please tell all the people that in your area that make the decisions to come to Discover Dalcroze. It's the partner to this.